Hello, and welcome to episode 598 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, and today we have a very, very special guest. This is a young man you know from air horns, a young man you know from his seminal work on late-round quarterback strategy, which is now completely defunct. Or is it? It's a young man you knew from Number Fire. It is Zachariason, currently of late-round fantasy football. JJ, how's it going today, buddy?
What's going on, man? Good to talk to you as always.
On today's show, we're going to talk all things quarterback for single quarterback leagues. Note that we do have a show coming up next week on Superflex and 2 quarterback leagues. We'll be joined by JJ and Sean Siegel for that one. Super excited. Stay tuned for that. But as I said today, we are talking about quarterback strategy and micro takes for 1 quarterback leagues. Do we need to get one from the top tier? Is a late round quarterback still viable? Which mid-round quarterbacks can compete with the big dogs? A lot to cover. Before we get into it, want to alert everyone that our early bird bundle offer expires this Friday. The bundle combines Draft Kit Pro, Redraft, Dynasty, Best Ball with our in-season package, DFS, and Redraft at the lowest possible price of $250. That covers all fantasy from now until your draft, then DFS/Redraft all the way through the Super Bowl. So it's about $12 or $13 a week. If we're talking only regular season, far too cheap in my opinion, but of course, not my call. Silva's fault. That price will be going up Friday. So if you're playing both Redraft, Best Ball, Dynasty, and DFS, now is the time to get in there. All right. Quarterbacks. JJ literally wrote the book on late round quarterbacks. I have also been employing a late round quarterback strategy going all the way back to the year 2000 with Dante Culpepper. Did you ever envision a scenario, JJ, in which quarterbacks would be going in round 2 and very smart people would be saying, not only is it okay, but it is right? And there are a lot of smart people out there right now saying quarterback in round 2, early round 3 is right. Did you ever envision that when you wrote the book on late round quarterbacking?
I thought it might get to this point eventually. The thing that's really changed, though, is not so much that the position in terms of the way that it's been scored is changing. It's more so that the market's gotten so much sharper, right? Like back in 2015, 2016, things were totally different in terms of what people were valuing, what people weren't valuing with their quarterbacks. And I really think what changed it all, man, was Lamar Jackson's MVP season. I really think it was people's recognition, not that he was an early round quarterback, but it was this recognition of these monster numbers that can come from guys who are these dual threat quarterbacks. And then obviously, you know, these guys are unicorns now throwing the ball too. They can do everything. And so I think since then, everything's just completely changed. I'm not overly surprised, especially after last year. You know, we'll get to it. There were some dynamics that definitely favored the big 3 quarterbacks that went in their favor. But yeah, I mean, I'm not all that shocked. Am I disappointed? It's a little bit sad that you got to pour some out for the late round quarterback strategy.
Is the original late round quarterback book still in circulation, or do you have to remove it from circulation now? Is it completely defunct?
Dude, it's one of those things, like if anyone does anything in like research or like even the arts to some degree, like hopefully you're getting better every year at what you do. I don't know about you, but I look back at the stuff that I did in like 2011, 2012 when I first started doing all this stuff, and I'm like, I cringe when I go back and I read it and I look at it. And so I hope that it is not out there. I hope that no one has a copy of that thing because it is trash. It is bad.
See, you mentioned the market getting smarter. I also think that the position has changed, maybe more than it sounds like you do. I mean, back when it was Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Peyton Manning as the top quarterbacks, there just weren't guys that could do both. There were some very good running quarterbacks in the league at that time. There were some very good throwing quarterbacks. There were not guys that could do both. In the modern NFL, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, maybe we'll see on Justin Fields throwing, Daniel Jones. You just didn't have this many guys that could actually run with the football and throw it now. So I guess I would push back on that. The actual position hasn't changed as much.
No, I agree with you totally there. I just mean more so from the standpoint of like a standard VORP formula and the way that people view like the difference between this quarterback to this quarterback from a points per game perspective. You're right. I mean, what's changed is the rushing component and the fact that these guys, like even back to like 2015 when Cam Newton was the dude and he was able to, score double-digit touchdowns and stuff at the goal line. His passing numbers weren't nearly as gaudy as the numbers that we're seeing from these guys now. And, the difference between, so like I published that book back in 2012. It was after the 2011 season when like crazy quarterback numbers were happening. It was that near lockout season. And we sort of saw similar things happening with the COVID season where offenses just dictated games more. And so the 2012 season, it was pretty easy to say, hey, don't draft your quarterbacks early while the market's drafting them early. But the difference now between then is that we have mobility at the quarterback position, and mobility is a lot stickier year over year than these passing numbers are, right? Like if you look at 2012, we had the single highest quarterback ADPs that we've seen over the last decade. And it was 3 quarterbacks going in round 1 and 2 going in the early round 2. But the guys going in round 1 were Tom Brady and Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers, guys who didn't have, that upside with rushing. Now it's players that you can understand going in those rounds. It's a lot easier from a predictability standpoint to draft those guys, which is why it makes more sense for them to go in round 2 and 3 as opposed to back then.
They're separating more, I think, is the major point that JJ is trying to make. Whereas we used to be able to stream pocket quarterbacks in, and I used to do this. I used to stream quarterbacks in home leagues all the time, especially 10-team home leagues. I just go to the wire, stream quarterbacks in. If you try to do that now, I think you're getting absolutely wrecked. I don't know, JJ. Do you think we're going to talk about late round quarterbacks? I think streaming is almost completely out now. Would you agree with that?
It's tough, so it's funny because I have Living the Stream, this podcast I do with Denny Carter, where we're literally picking guys off the waiver wire each week and giving recommendations. And then we keep track of the Frankenstein that we create throughout the season. Now, the downside to that is that we don't have the ability or the ability to get these guys and just keep them on our roster week in and week out, right? Because we're only looking at who's available on the waiver wire that week. So if someone comes off the waiver wire who ends up hitting, like Justin Fields last year, we streamed him 1 week last year, but then, he ended up being too high rostered, so we couldn't recommend him each week. Now, with that being said, for years, we were like at QB5, QB6 in points per game, like with zero investment at the position. We were literally middle of the road in terms of QB1 with our Frankenstein. Last 3 years, we have not been. We've been at like QB10 to QB12. And a lot of that just goes back to the fact that people are getting sharper. If you look at top 18 quarterbacks by ADP over the last, since 2011, it's usually what I date back to. If you look at the R squared between where these guys were being drafted and how many points per game they finished with, for years and years, that R square was literally 0. It was non-existent. Like you could have been throwing a dart at the QB16. He had just as good a chance to finish as QB1 as the QB1 did. But then the last 3 years, that R squared value has jumped dramatically after the Lamar Jackson season. You get numbers like 45% last year, 42%, 44%, 55%, not 44%. And then right before that, it was literally 0% in 2019. Like there was no correlation. Now we're seeing that correlation, which means you can't get these late round quarterbacks nearly as easily, and those guys aren't readily available on your waiver wire.
Okay. Now, looking back at last season, my best teams were the ones where I actually did hit on later round quarterback. Jalen Hurts was a massive hit for us and a lot of sharp people in the industry. Justin Fields was a hit. JJ already mentioned him. Daniel Jones was a massive, massive hit for me, especially in best ball. And so later round quarterback, to me, even though Allen, Hurts, Fields had these outrageous seasons, I still was able to get there with a middle round quarterback strategy of sorts by picking the right guys. What did you think of last year? Any takeaways for you from last year that we can apply going forward on how the quarterback landscape played out?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that what we see with the position now is that there's just different pockets in your draft that you can attack, as opposed to just being like, yo, I'm just going to wait, right? Like that's a strategy you go with for years and years and years. Now there's just pockets where you can say, all right, yeah, I'm going to attack the elite guys. That's fine. I'm going to get, a middle round quarterback this year. There's still going to be a late round quarterback or two that's going to emerge and be relevant every single season. So, I think it's premature to say that like, we're joking about it, but like late round quarterback is just totally, totally dead. I think that it's totally dead as the strategy and go-to strategy to use. But I do think last year was somewhat of an anomaly, just in terms of what we saw from those big three separating themselves from the rest of the pack. We really hadn't seen that since 2011. Like I said, it's a season, and the next season after that, the players who were boosted up into that first round, into that second round, they didn't really live up to ADP expectation. And so I think that there's times where you can go early round quarterback this year, but there's plenty of reason to not go that route because you are paying a premium after a season. You're being fairly reactionary, and I think we need to be real about that you're being reactionary to what happened the previous season. Not to say that they're like horrible picks because of the rushing component that we just talked about and stuff and the stickiness to that, but we do have to to recognize the fact that we're reacting to a season last year where these three guys separated themselves. The middle round, the mid QB ones, if you will, were horrible last year, right? Not even just by ADP, but just by how they finished. And that advantage likely won't be nearly as significant this year. There's probably going to be an advantage, but I don't think it's going to be as significant as what we saw last year.
All right. Let's give some micro takes. The people love micro takes. I know you're aware of this, JJ. I have Jalen Hurts as my number one quarterback. I actually have Josh Allen 2, Mahomes 3. Market disagrees. Patrick Mahomes has the highest ADP by a pretty significant margin here. Again, I am not one to doubt Mahomes whatsoever. I think he's right there in the tier with those guys, but you get worse wide receiver play and you get obviously less rushing out of Patrick Mahomes. What do you think about Mahomes having number one ADP? And what do you think of my take, Jalen Hurts number one overall fantasy quarterback this year?
Yeah, I have Hurts number one as well. I'm kind of just leaning on my projections for that, to be honest with you, just because they're obviously just tight. I'm going to use it as a tiebreaker, but the rushing upside is going to be there more with Hurts. You have that stability more so. Mahomes obviously is going to have a higher touchdown rate than most quarterbacks because he's arguably, or if not, the best quarterback of all time. But it was on the higher side last year. That has a chance to regress a little bit. It's not like his weapons are unbelievable. And then, with Hurts, he actually could improve in the touchdown rate column this year. It was only 4.8% last season. So I like Hurts number one. I have Mahomes 2 only because there are maybe question marks with Josh Allen in that, the elbow situation and like what went down during the second half of last year. I'm not really putting that much into that. I don't, I'm doing enough drafts where I can say, okay, I'll get Allen here. I'll get Mahomes here, whatever. But that's really the separator from like a ranking standpoint for me.
Yeah, I thought the Josh Allen elbow stuff was real. Like, I didn't think that was a fake thing. I think there was a noticeable dip in the data and his play after he sustained that elbow injury. I like Josh Allen 2 there. And actually, one thing I want to ask you about, I consider, given Todd Monken getting to Baltimore, given the weapons that they've added, best weapons of Lamar's career, I would actually have Lamar in that top tier. Do you think that is a step too far? Market started out with the 3 guys in kind of a tier of their own and Lamar back. It's starting to get a little bit closer now, but for me personally, I think Lamar is right there with those other 3 guys.
I agree with you. I think that what we're going to see in not as sharp leagues, home leagues and stuff, we're going to see a separation still between those 3 and Lamar, partially because we're probably going to see, Mahomes, et cetera, in the first round at times and those kinds of drafts and stuff. And I think people are just naturally like not as in on Lamar because there's so much narrative outside of what's going on the field with him. But I'm with you, man. He to me, obviously he's QB4, but if there's a candidate to really make that jump and just finish as the QB1 this year, it's easily him with those weapons. Okay.
In your personal drafts, how often are you actually taking a quarterback in this top tier? We know they're going round 2, round 3 right now. I've seen some crazy things in round 1. I've seen some crazy things where they fall to round 4. I think round 2 and 3 is where they'll go most often. How often do you take them in like a standard 12 team, half PPR? I'm not talking best ball, just standard half PPR league like people will play in against their boys. Do you think it's right? How often would you take a quarterback from this top 4 tier here?
Yeah, it's going to sound like a lame answer, but I do think that there's a lot of validity to it, that if you're in a smaller league, like a 10-team league, let's say, instead of a 12 or 14, what have you, you need a more perfect roster. You need your lineup to be that much better, and the opportunity cost at every pick is smaller because you're picking sooner, and the players that you're giving up on, you're going to get better players in the next round. So it's okay to go with a quarterback in those scenarios in like round 3 or what have you, like early round 3, even that's fine. And I've done a lot of research too, showing that middle of round 3 is typically where we see big drop-offs in running back and wide receiver hit rates. So, opportunity cost then gets lowered. And so it's a lot easier to swallow that onesie position that early, the non-Kelsey or Andrews onesie position, if you will. So I think it's fine to go mid round 3, especially this year. If you look at we're seeing it a lot in best ball drafts, like where you hit that wall and you're like, I don't want any of these guys in the 3rd round, where you're just like, I could get a guy in the middle of the 4th that's just as good as the guy that's in the middle of the 3rd here. And that's why I think we see a lot of guys just kind of collect and get collected there. And it's really easy to draft a quarterback in that range. So that's sort of where I'm at. If you're in a bigger league, though, I think people like misread this often, where they think that if they're in a bigger league, they should go after those onesie positions, the tight end or the quarterback, where you're only starting one of them, because you're going to get this big advantage at those positions. But the problem with that is that the more teams you're adding, the more running backs and wide receivers are actually being started. Right. And so that makes the demand for those positions even greater. So I think in smaller leagues and in non-sharp leagues, where that if you are drafting with your boys, you're able to get guys off the waiver wire or get values late, it's easier to actually go with an elite quarterback in those scenarios.
Right. I was going to make two of the same points. If I'm in a 10-team league, I am getting one of the top tier quarterbacks, one of the big four. In my opinion, I want to dominate in those 10-team leagues at quarterback and tight end, because everybody's going to have loaded at running back and wide receiver. Yep. Regardless, you can actually separate at quarterback and tight end. And so, yeah, I mean, makes a ton of sense to go after elite quarterback there. Also, if I think my competition is weak and I can get just steals, guys who should be going, in the 7th round, in the 10th round and stuff like that, at running back and wide receiver, I'm more willing to take quarterback early in those scenarios, beat them later, because it's just really hard to replicate what the top 4 can do. Okay. What if you miss out on the top tier, JJ? What if you say, man, I really wanted one in the top 4, but I can't do it? My strategy in the past has been to not go to this kind of mid-range here, not kind of reach up and try to match it with a round 4, round 5, round 6 quarterback, but to wait a little bit longer. However, there are certainly some quarterbacks that I like in this range this year. We're talking about Joe Burrow, Justin Fields, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson. What do you think about what you do if you miss out on that top tier?
Yeah, look, like I said, you can attack these different pockets and feel pretty good. Like I think that similar to the wide receiver market, I think the quarterback market is just really efficient in the way that people are drafting them. There's maybe a couple guys here and there where I think they should be maybe 1 or 2 spots higher, but no huge qualms for me. Like if you want to go with Justin Fields, is he going to be Jalen Hurts this year? I mean, obviously the rushing is there, but I think the one issue with Fields that obviously he gets DJ Moore, he gets this top pass catcher that we saw with Josh Allen, that we saw with Jalen Hurts, and then they made that huge leap. The problem is their year 2 numbers from like an EPA standpoint per drop back and from a success rate perspective were way better than what Justin Fields had last year. So there is some fear that he's just not there as a passer. There's fear there. Now, do I think that the cost in doing so is that huge of a deal? Not really. I mean, I'm not like aggressively going after Fields, but I don't think that he's the worst pick in the world. So he's fine, with Justin Herbert, he's fine where he goes. I get the love for him seeing higher ADOTs in this more offense with Quentin Johnston there now finally, and then them being able to hopefully stretch the field a little bit more. But the one guy that I've targeted most is probably Deshaun Watson, of this non-elite group. If you look what he did last year, doesn't play for like 2 years. I don't think it's that big of a surprise that he wasn't sharp as a thrower. But the one thing that I loved is that, he averaged close to his average on a per rush base or on the ground as he had done prior to all of that stuff happening. The last full season we saw from Deshaun Watson, he averaged over 23 fantasy points per game, and 3.9 of those points came via rushing. Last year, obviously the points per game number wasn't as high, but the rushing points per game number was nearly identical to what he did, the last time we saw him. And so we know the athleticism is there. We know that upside is hypothetically there. And now you add Elijah Moore, you get a more pass-heavy offense. There's a lot of arrows pointing up on the field for Deshaun Watson. I actually have him ranked 1 spot ahead of Trevor Lawrence instead of T-Law going in front of him. But I understand the Trevor Lawrence hype and all. I just think that of all the guys in the top 10 that aren't in that top 4, maybe Fields aside, I think that Watson has the most intriguing upside because we've seen it, but also because the athleticism was still there last year.
Yeah, I mean, the concern on Watson for me is he was so bad in those games last year. Now, you can excuse away a lot of it. 2 of them were horrific weather. He was also coming off an entire regular season where he wasn't practicing with the team. He hadn't played football in a really long time. So I'm fine with Deshaun Watson. That's just like the only thing in the back of my head. And the other thing in the back of my head on Deshaun Watson is I can wait 2 or 3 rounds, maybe even 4 rounds, and get guys that I really like, who we'll talk about in a second here. I just want to get one more take on Justin Herbert off. I actually think Justin Herbert can take a leap to have like a truly elite season. I mean, the offense they were running last year, the ADOT was so bad. I think the offensive line is actually going to be really good this year, giving them enough time to get the ball down the field. You add Quentin Johnston there with Josh Palmer and Mike Williams and Keenan Allen and Eckler. I mean, I could see Justin Herbert like really taking a leap this year. He's just very expensive, and I would agree with JJ that he's probably priced appropriately. He typically goes in the 50s or so. All right. What do you consider late round quarterback? Do you consider QB 10, QB 15, QB 12? What do we actually consider late round quarterback? Because I want to get some late round quarterback takes off my take, but I don't want to call them late round takes if they're not actually late round quarterbacks.
I feel like at this point, probably double digit rounds ish is probably late. But like back when I wrote that ebook originally, it was like 7th or 8th round or something like that. Like it was not what it is today.
Okay. So if you wait and if you miss on that middle tier, and I think JJ and I both agree there's fine options in the middle tier. If you wait, my two favorites are Tua Tagovailoa and Geno Smith. Now, Tua was awesome through 12 weeks of last season. Like I thought a legit case could be made for him as a top 3, top 4 MVP candidate. Tyreek and Jalen Waddle were just going absolutely nuts. Concussion stuff. I mean, some people out there say, oh, defense has figured out Tua. I think it was more concussion, everything around all that just really messed up Tua. Now, obviously, there's some risk there this year that happens again. I think I like to play fantasy that when I pick guys, I pick them as if there's a really good chance they're going to be healthy because predicting injuries is so hard. Tua has been a primary target for me. What do you think about waiting and making Tua your quarterback 1, your starter on your fantasy team? Does he have enough to get there for you?
I think that he's fine. You know, like there's a giant pocket for me here where there's a lot of essentially pocket passer types, right? I mean, like Tua is not going to give you a bunch of work on the ground. He averaged 0.54 points per game via the ground, which is really not, I mean, that's lower than Kirk Cousins last year, right? Yep. So, you know, they run a lot of RPOs, but they're one of those offenses that will not run with the quarterback and go that route. So we know that he's going to have to get it done with his arm, but he has the weapons to have that. You know, players like that need that insane touchdown rate season in order to be in that top 6 conversation. And he at least has the weapons to be in that conversation. We saw him. I mean, he had some crazy performances, like 38-point performances and stuff last year. So we know it's at least possible. So I don't mind Tua. You mentioned Geno, though. Geno is someone who I prefer at cost to Tua. You know, this is from my draft guy, but over the last 12 seasons, there have been 21 quarterbacks who were drafted after pick 100 who had multiple wide receivers ranked in the top 30 at their position. And of those 21, 15 of them ended up exceeding ADP expectation. And not only that, but with Geno, he's not a 0 from a points per game perspective on the ground either. I mean, last year, you know, he averaged 2.5 points per game on the ground, which is more obviously like 5 times as much as Tua. That's more than what Dak had last year. That's more than what Kirk Cousins had last year. And then the other piece to that is that last season, Seattle barely ran any goal line rushes. They had 10 goal line rushes. It was lowest in the league. Kenneth Walker had every single one of those rushes. So there's going to be some regression favorably for Geno, maybe seeing some quarterback sneaks and stuff at the goal line and maybe scoring some more touchdowns on the ground. I just think that environment for him, you know, obviously there's risk with him too, because we've only seen this from Geno Smith for a year now, right? I don't really care about risk at this point in the draft with both Tua and Geno. So I'm with you, you know, with the concussion stuff with Tua and then this stuff with Geno. I just prefer Geno a little bit more at ADP, but I think Tua is totally fine.
Geno, to me, like, I don't understand why the market's not on him. I mean, think about the weapons that he has. I mean, Metcalf, Lockett, JSN is awesome. Not to mention Charbonnet. Walker. Also, I think their offensive line is going to be solid, and completion percentage is actually like accuracy is like pretty sticky. And Geno was by most metrics like one of, if not the most accurate quarterbacks in the NFL last year. Really like Geno. And like, yeah, I mean, we did a FFPC main event on Sunday night. We ended up with Dak as our starting quarterback, which I'm fine with. We were stacking with CD. I would have taken Tua or Geno also, and like just figured it out and been okay with it. So I still think that we have enough upside in those guys. One guy that we know has upside rushing that's been a controversial guy is Anthony Richardson. Common people, like the casual fantasy bro, hates Anthony Richardson. Hates. And I could see him going really late in some of these home league formats. I'd be lying if I said I was not concerned that this is going to be very ugly from a passing perspective. You just don't find humans on earth that can do what Anthony Richardson can do from an athleticism perspective. And that gets people to thinking, oh, maybe he's the next Jalen Hurts. Yeah, Shane Steichen. Maybe he's the next Jalen Hurts here. I haven't been taking a ton of Richardson, but it's kind of a scary fade. What do you think about his outlook here in year one?
I love Richardson. And you mentioned like the way that I think that like best ball drafts and stuff, obviously sharper ADP, it's not like as necessary in my opinion, because you can get better stacks elsewhere. And like the other guys going around even after him are still really solid. But if you look at like, I mean, even if you look at like a Fantasy Pros ranking or something like that, I mean, like he's going like he's like QB 18 or something like he goes way, way later, and he will go way, way later, like in your home leagues and stuff this year. And look, there's a small sample size here because we don't see players like this very often, and rookies, playing a lot of games like this with his sort of build and what he does. But since 2011, we've seen 5 top 10 NFL draft pick quarterbacks play at least 7 games as a rookie and hit 5 rush attempts per game. So those 5 were Deshaun Watson, Cam Newton, Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, and RG3. Every single one of those guys scored 17 fantasy points per game, and 3 of them scored 21 fantasy points or more per game. So I think the floor is at least there for Richardson. The thing with like quarterback rushing too, I think a lot of people assume that like it's a ceiling thing. It's more of a floor thing, right? Like when Rich Rebar wrote the Konami Code article, back in like 2013, he was talking about Tim Tebow and Terrell Pryor and these guys. He wasn't saying it from the perspective of like these guys are league winners. He's saying it from the perspective of like these guys suck at quarterback and they're still good in fantasy football because they're giving you that rushing. And so Richardson, to me, he's going to at least give you a floor. I actually, as long as he's starting, I'm not that nervous about him giving you that floor. I actually think that the problem could be ceiling, because I don't know if the passing is going to be there in year one.
Yeah, agreed. The other guy that goes in this range we should mention is Daniel Jones. I mean, obviously, I don't think anything has changed for Daniel Jones off the season he had last year, except they've added a bunch more reasonable weapons for him at the wide receiver and tight end position. And so I'm always a Daniel Jones guy. I'm always a Daboll guy. I have no problem whatsoever with Daniel Jones. He goes around in the 110, 120 range or so, and I think that's definitely fine on Daniel Jones. I would consider it a teardrop, for me at least, after QB 15, which is Geno Smith. Then, to me, you start to get into the real late round quarterback stuff. I do not want any of these guys. I'm talking Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff, Russell Wilson, Derek Carr, Kenny Pickett, all these guys that go after Geno Smith. I do not want any of those guys as my starter. What do you think about true late round quarterbacking this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine like you plugging and playing these guys in your season long league and like feeling good about it. I think a lot of them are like values from like a super flex standpoint, like Kenny Pickett, for instance. He goes like, you'll get him at like QB 23, QB 24. I think in his range of outcomes is maybe a low end QB1 season, but maybe a high end QB2 season. Like last year, the Steelers during the second half of the season were actually 3rd in the NFL in yards per drive behind only the Lions and Chiefs, which is absolutely wild. They just couldn't convert into touchdowns, right? He added 3.2 points per game with his legs. We know there's regression coming in how they score touchdowns, because they scored more rushing touchdowns and passing touchdowns last year. And they have good weapons. I mean, not only by ADP and what the market's telling us, but objectively, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, not bad weapons there. So I'm bullish on some of these guys, like a Kenny Pickett, just based on them being better than their ADP. But I highly, highly doubt you're going to be in a scenario where they're plug and play week in, week out starters and anything more than streamers in a regular season long league.
Yeah, I'm okay with the Pickett take. I think he has good weaponry, solid weaponry, which helps. The late round quarterback, I actually think that has the best chance to get there on efficiency. And that's what you really need from these late round kind of pocket quarterbacks, is you need insane efficiency. Brock Purdy is the one who could actually have insane efficiency, because he has Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle. And so you get into a spot with Purdy where, man, maybe he only throws 25 times a game, but what if he's close to the league lead in touchdown rate and yards per attempt and stuff like that? Then you start seeing scenarios where Purdy can actually be really viable. You're asking for a ton on an efficiency basis, but man, like Nick Mullins was efficient in this offense for the 49ers. So Purdy would be like the true late round one I think I like most. Any thoughts there? Any other true late round sleepers you want to mention?
Yeah, look, I love Purdy. I'm even like on record talking about how the 49ers offense is going to regress a bunch, but I still think Purdy is a good value where he's going, because we know the weaponry is there. We know the upside's there, just strictly from that perspective. The only other like late guy, true dart throw guy, would be Sam Howell. We saw him in that lone start last year go 5 for 35 and a touchdown. In college during his final season at UNC, he had 800 rushing yards. His weapons aren't bad. I mean, Washington's weapons are fairly strong compared to some of these later round quarterbacks. And it's just the ambiguity. You want to buy into the uncertainty of these guys, and a lot of them are uncertain, but you want to buy into that because that's why a lot of times they're being drafted as late as they are. If we had seen something from them before, they wouldn't be drafted so late. So I just think environment wise and the rushing production and the athleticism from that perspective, I think Hal does make some sense. But again, I'd be pretty shocked if he's a plug and play guy this year.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, one other guy I want to get your take on. Russell Wilson had like horrible season, right? And Seattle fans and Seattle coaches and Seattle organization are celebrating. We were right. Russ was the problem all along. I would just note that once Nathaniel Hackett was fired, I know it was a real small sample, only 2 games. Russ actually looked pretty good after Nathaniel Hackett was fired. Now he gets, to me, one of the best offensive schemers in Russ Wilson. Still has, I think, pretty good weaponry in Judy Sutton, Marvin Mims, Dulcich. So I could see Russ Wilson bounce back. But I mean, I mentioned being scared about Deshaun Watson. I mean, we had a full sample of Russ Wilson in Denver. It's really scary. So yeah, any hope for Russ Wilson from you this year?
I'm pretty much at market with him. I have no strong take either way because I can see the bull case, I can see the bear case, and it's one of those things where I just think that there's another cluster of these pocket guys like a Goff, right? Like I don't know if they're like obviously Russ has a little bit more rushing upside than Goff does because Goff will not, but from an environment standpoint, from playing in a dome, I mean, we saw so many shootouts in Detroit and stuff. I just don't know if there's like that significant of a difference between those two guys. And I know that Goff goes before him and such, but I would just rather say, instead of like taking a stand on one of them, just say, yeah, if one of them falls to me over the other, I would take them over the other, but they're not guys that I'm necessarily like hyper targeting at this point, other than stacks and stuff like that in best ball.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I think we've said it all. I hope we've said it all on the quarterback position here today. One note that I would like to make is that in home leagues and managed leagues, a lot of people only take one quarterback. And so if you see that like 7 or 8 have already taken a quarterback, you can really let things slide. A lot of these people do not take more than one quarterback. And so unlike best ball and other formats where people are just like taking back-to-back quarterbacks, taking 3 quarterbacks in 4 rounds, that just doesn't happen in managed redraft. So be aware of what your opponents are doing in redraft once you get in there. Again, I know a lot of you are in 2 quarterback leagues. I was actually shocked by the results of my poll. I did a poll, how many of you play in a 2 quarterback super flex league, and like half the people said yes. So I had no idea, but apparently they do. And we'll be back to cover that for that half of the people next week. Stay tuned for that. JJ will be back for that episode. JJ, tell the people where they can find you and all your work.
I'm on Twitter at LateRoundQB or X, whatever we're calling it now.
No, we're still calling it Twitter.
Good. All right, good. I'm doing the same. Or you can find all my work over on lateround.com.
All right. Lateround.com is the site. Really appreciate JJ being here. If you're watching this, if you're listening to this on the audio feed, reminder, on our YouTube feed, this show is up also, but a lot of stuff on our YouTube that is not, I repeat, not on the audio only feed. So be sure you head to our YouTube, hit subscribe there. It is indeed free. For JJ, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.